1, we'll call a meeting to order. Joy, would you please call the roll?
Hamilton,
Yes.
Rasmussen,
Yes.
Revelinsky.
Yes.
Boyer.
Yes.
Ledger Kalin.
Yes.
Hamas.
Yes.
Hallie.
Yes.
Thank you. Before we move to our consent agenda, are there any additions or changes to this evening's agenda?
When you look on your iPads, there has been an additional lifeguard added to that resolution for Park and Rec. Same thing, this will be the only one we're going to allow.
Tommy.
It's Tommy Thorne, and it's because they are so short for lifeguards since Christy broke her arm.
Okay, so
That
we'll
was added. We're not going to do that again, but
add Tommy Thorne to the resolution for employment for Park and Rec in the consent agenda. So then we'll move to the other items in our consent agenda, which would include the minutes from the August 12th meeting, the approval of liquor licenses for the Orpheum Theater and Pet Stop, and approval of claims in the amount of $265,027.28.
Move for approval.
Moved by Revelinsky to approve,
Second.
second by Rasmussen. Any discussion?
Yeah, I have a question.
Sure.
Orpheum Theater,
The old movie.
selling liquor. Is it just wine, beer, liquor?
That's what I heard they're doing.
That's what I,
And-
Joy, what did they apply?
As a,
yeah, I didn't even-
Wine and beer.
I mean, they are, there's a restaurant going in there, there's a taco restaurant, and I think,
but,
but it's not, but that's gonna be under a separate management, I think, so their application was for wine and beer?
but that would
I
allow it
honestly-
anywhere inside,
The
sitting
theater.
watching the movie, sipping your drink, right?
Scott, do you want to touch on that?
I did the inspection.
Come on up.
Sorry, I
It's for the folks at home, Scott, so they can hear your wonderful voice and explanation.
I finally got in, they got their fire alarm system hooked up today. I did get the inspection. They passed on all areas of the inspection. They'll be selling wine, beer, and the movie theaters at this point are not going to be used. There's a sit-down area when you first walk in where they will be having the wine, the beer, and whatever else they get from the back kitchen area. There will also be an area in the back where you can sit down.
But is that gonna prohibit them from taking it out where the theater's at? And
The theater's not even in use. The theater is, it's totally.
eventually, the theater will be in use, won't it?
Later down the road, yes, but right now.
Well, they're
there's-
gonna have to comply.
Yeah, it's
I
not
mean,
even,
If they're going to allow alcoholic drinks in the theater, they're going to have to check IDs going into the theater, I would imagine.
I would imagine, but, you know, I've heard John say over and over, these are
That's true.
family-oriented type things.
I mean, if it's
and-
going to be, it would be just like having a beer garden without ropes around it, is how it would
Yeah,
be in a way.
that's kind of
So
how it would be.
we'll have to look at that. We're approving it for just their restaurant at this point, since they're not, and we can hear from them how, or we could table this
that's how I
until.
Well,
inspected it, was as a restaurant.
If it's approved under Orpheum Theater and they open up within the year for the theater, it's going to include the Orpheum Theater. So that's where my concern comes in. I realize that the theater is not open at this time, but I do know that these licenses are granted for a one-year time period. So if the theater opens up during that one-year time period, it's covered by this liquor license.
Well,
Sorry, how is that any different than the FACC?
You're right. Yeah, you have
In
to have
my
a
eyes,
pretty-
it's not.
And they
Well, that
have
is
one.
true.
And you do have to have a pretty good reason to deny it, because the state can come back and approve it.
Right.
I
for you.
think though right now, I mean, we're talking about what is actually open. The theater part isn't even open, so what we're granting as service is the service area that they have open at the time of the permit's issued. If they're gonna issue, or if they're gonna engage in doing a mugs and movies type kind of concept, I think maybe we could talk to them and have them, you know, because that's a different occupancy rating. Scott still has to go through there and approve that. We don't have any
Okay.
specific provisions in our zoning code regarding a mugs and movies kind of concept, though. So I think we have to talk to them about it and maybe look at a
I
different
just felt
permit.
the question needed to be asked.
No, it's a good question. I think we could look at a different permit for it, perhaps.
Thanks, Scott. Thanks. Any other discussion? Now, will please call the roll?
Revelinsky.
Yes.
Rasmussen.
Yes.
Hamas.
Yes.
Boyer.
Yes, but abstain on the minutes.
Hallie,
Yes.
Ledger Caitlin,
Yes.
Hamilton.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Next, council will move to our public appearances, and we have a request by Chris Sorflaten to address council. Chris?
Hello, my name is Chris Sorflaten. I'm a local caretaker and landlord. And I was just kind of idly researching and, you know, in the evenings and stuff, and I came up with this, I started reading about ethanol. And I came up with this idea to ban ethanol in Fairfield. That's corn-based ethanol, which is actually takes 70% more energy to produce it than it actually you're using. So if we were to ban that in Fairfield, we would be lowering our automobile greenhouse gas emissions by 7% overnight. And this would not affect jobs or farmers or anything. It would just be like a local policy that I think would make a good statement. You know, it seems like the whole country is kind of phasing this out, and this would be like our message from Iowa that we, from Fairfield, want this to be phased out as well. And yeah. Anyway, I assume you guys got the email.
Yeah, council received all of your points and all of the links that you provided to. So yeah, gave us an opportunity to kind of bone up a bit on ethanol.
Yeah.
Council, any response? Maybe before the council does, I just wanted to ask a couple of clarifying questions. One is, have you spoken with any fuel retailers in town?
No, I have not.
And so they would be, if Fairfield had a ban, if we could enact a ban, which I'm not sure that we can,
yeah.
Would they just not be able to sell that fuel?
That was the idea, yeah.
But then they can't get leaded fuel, 87 octane, to sell as a replacement, so you'd basically be putting them out of business.
Well, I think that 87 doesn't have ethanol in it, so they
Right.
would still be able to sell 87 and 91, but just not the 89, which is what has ethanol in
But
it.
I think there's a mandate to sell the blended fuel.
There is a federal mandate
There's a
on
federal mandate to do that.
Right. But
it. And there is also a federal
It's an EPA
mandate
mandate.
to build vehicles that run on E85 or greater
Flex fuel
as well.
vehicles, yeah.
Flex fuel vehicles.
Yeah.
And
It's my understanding that's not on a station per station basis, but more of oil company per oil company basis. And
Is the
that
other-
mandate is also uses specific language saying renewable fuel. And according to the research I've done, that corn-based ethanol is not a renewable fuel, but there are other forms of ethanol, such as cellulosic ethanol, biodiesel, algae-based ethanol, and that are actually renewable. They actually produce more energy than they consume to create the fuel.
And Chris, you're right. I mean, all that is true. And those arguments have been there even before the EPA mandate was put in place. I think everybody knew that, or hoped that the direction that the industry was going to go was to a more cellulosic-based production. But that technology has actually been slow to develop at the scale that ethanol is produced right now, which I think why we're not seeing that. We're not seeing those conversions or those cellulosic plants built. When they are, then I think we're ready to make that conversion. But in the meantime, I think a lot of the problems that you point out have been part of the debate from the very beginning.
Yeah.
And I understand there's still voices against it right now, but
Is there any way we could check to see if we could do that on a station per station basis? I could make a couple calls, and if we clarify that, then maybe we can consider this further.
I don't know that. I don't know that your council is willing to consider it further, but I just wondered in terms of your research whether you really talked with some of the people who sell fuel right now. The other thing too is before the council would even begin to consider what you're talking about, we're going to be hearing from the Iowa corn growers. We're going to be hearing from the state ethanol association. You're going to get other sides of the story for certain. and I just don't know where you're going to end up. But
That's a dialogue I'd like to open up, because I believe a lot of the farmers, the ones I've talked to and stuff, like the price of everything is just so high right now. Everyone has to go grow corn if they want to be economically viable. There's no alternatives. There's like, I personally talked to at least 3 people who own organic farms and organic land, and they've converted it to corn, you know, and it's like, for every gallon of ethanol you pump into your gas, you're literally dumping 50 to 100 pounds of topsoil into the ocean. There's that much land erosion, and it's just growing. They're taking land out of the CRP and cutting down trees, you know, burning huge piles of trees and stuff just to grow corn. And yeah.
Okay. Any other comments, council, or if there's any interest in
Yeah, I'd be
further
willing
research?
I'd be willing to hear it out from the Environment Committee standpoint, just because your passion is obvious, and I can't see any harm in getting a little more information at least.
Okay. All right, so we'll refer this to our Environmental and Franchise Committee, and at their next meeting, you can have a little bit more in-depth hearing, and you'll bring back a recommendation to the council.
Great.
Okay, thanks so much. Next, council will move to our resolutions, or action items and ordinances. And the first is to set a public hearing for the rezoning of the Pilot Grove Savings Bank. If you'll recall, that property was just annexed into the city, so everything will come in as R1. It will have a business purpose, so the hearing will be to rezone it from R1 to B2. And we'll set that first public hearing for September 9th at 7 p.m. At our next meeting. Entertain a motion to set the public hearing for the rezoning.
Move to approve.
Moved by Hamilton,
Second.
second by Boyer. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, the same sign. Thank you. Next action item is awarding a land acquisition agent for our sewer project. We have a recommendation from French Reniker regarding a couple of appraisals that were reviewed. Kevin, I'll ask if you had anything to say about that first, and then we do have the letter of recommendation from French Reniker.
John, would you like to stand up?
The letter, I think, is pretty clear on the process that we used. We went through generally a qualification-based selection process. We mailed out requests for proposals to virtually everyone in the state that offered land acquisition services. I'm not sure you understand fully what that is, but it's basically enabling them to be the agent for the city, to go out, contact property owners, negotiate with them, come up with the best deal, which ultimately has to be approved by the city council. 2 proposals were received. JCG Land Services of Nevada was the better proposal, and as the letter said, we're recommending they be selected. We will then sit down with them and the appraiser, which is your next item, to clarify the exact scope of services, and contracts will be prepared for the first step 1 project and brought back to the city council for approval.
Great, thank you. And this would, John, this would be for both easement and acquisitions.
That's correct.
Yeah.
The Code of Iowa, you don't have to do a full-blown appraisal for parcels that are believed to be less than $10,000 or that do not involve a relocation. Any of those that do involve a dwelling purchase must be appraised. So we will look at getting appraisals for, I guess I would call representative properties, which will be used then and prorated for the easement acquisition on the sewers.
Okay, thank you, John. So Kathy, you have a recommendation for the approval of the services of JCG for our land acquisition and appraisal.
I would move for approval.
Moved by Hamilton,
Second.
second by Rasmussen. Any discussion? Not all those in favor signify by,
I have a
sorry, go ahead.
question.
Con.
Well, I
Sure.
I guess my question is, have we talked to anybody, any other cities, whether it's us or you guys, about their process and with actual people that they've dealt with?
Well, I personally stayed out of the process, left it up to my staff, because I am actually finishing a project using JCG in Centerville, buying land at their airport, similar to what Fairfield did a long time ago, seems like anyway. Anyway, and I was very pleased with them. Both of the companies list an arm's long length of municipal clients dealing with utility pipeline work, sewer and water work. So, and you know, we're familiar with both of them. I guess I wasn't surprised that JCG seemed to have a little bit better presence. Representatives of JCG came in today and met with Kevin so that he could actually meet the principal that we'll be dealing with, and also the agent that will be out in the field here.
Yeah.
You know, I just want to, I guess, note that sometimes these issues can be sensitive, and we want somebody who's sensitive
Yes.
to dealing with people and dealing with them appropriately, not heavy-handed, and, you know, that kind of thing, respectful.
Got a really good feeling from the representatives of JCG today. It went very well, the meeting did. They've been in business for around 15 years, engaged in this activity. I guess seeing it all would be something you could say about these guys, but I left the meeting feeling very good about them, and I think they're exactly that. And they were kind of talking that language, as a matter of fact, which made me feel pretty good, because of course we are looking at some sensitive stuff here.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Scotty. Any other discussion? So that actually then we are moving to the approval of our land acquisition agent, which is the next action item. So it would be awarding the appraisal. So then we have a motion and a second, so please call the roll.
Hamilton,
Yes.
Rasmussen,
Yes.
Ledger Kalen,
Yes.
Hallie,
Yes.
Revelinsky,
Yes.
Hamas,
Yes.
Boyer.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, John.
Good.
Next, am I correct? We just
We just did the land acquisition. We need to do a appraiser at this
the
point.
appraiser. Okay. So the next item then would be to approve the appraiser for the sewer project.
Yes, Your Honor. Actually, that should be
Same.
appraisers. There are actually going to be two firms. We are required to do a full appraisal and then have it reviewed by an independent appraiser. So you have an appraisal and a review appraisal. The letter, I think, clearly indicates we got 3 proposals. We're recommending the use of Cook Appraisal from Iowa City. Again, both of these companies had a long list of municipal clients for pipeline work. Commercial appraisals from West Des Moines. Frankly, as the recommendation says, we picked Cook because they're in Iowa City. They're going to have a lot more on-site work to do, and we felt the costs that they listed were virtually the same. So they're going to have less windshield time, so we felt it would be a better deal for the city. We have used commercial appraisers, again, on other projects. Both have done good jobs. So.
Move to approve Cook Appraisal for the appraisal work and commercial appraisals of Iowa for the review appraisals.
I'll second.
Okay, motion by Hamilton, second by Ledger Kalen. Any other discussion? Not all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, the same sign. Thank you, John. Next, council will move to our third and final reading of the rezoning of 809 West Taylor from R2 to R3. Maplewood Apartments LLC is requesting to redevelop the old Nelson Nursing Home. We've had several hearings on this, and I think we've really boiled the issues down to the essence of what we're trying to accomplish here. Although, at our last meeting, we discovered that the definitions within our zoning code between R2 and R3 are, I don't know if ambiguous is the right word, maybe a little vague, but they need, I think, some explanation to the council and to everyone involved in the process. I wanted to start that first before we open up our public hearing. So if John Marcy is here. John? There he is, okay. John. So again, what triggered this from the very beginning is that for this property to move from its prior use to multi-numbered apartments, and the developer was considering somewhere in the 18 to 19, John, we felt that there was some sort of a special circumstance that triggered the need for considering the R3.
Right. Kevin started to allude to it at the last meeting that our ordinance is so close that trying to define the difference is difficult. In the R2, multifamily residential is a conditional use. Basically, all that would mean is that as a conditional use, council might, in granting multifamily use in that zone, want to tie some conditions to it. It's a little different than what's called conditional zoning, where you allow the zoning, but then if it doesn't work out, you take the zoning away. In a conditional use, you put things in as far as we want another blind around the parking lot. We want things done that are compatible with this part of the neighborhood next to it, and so we'll grant it subject to the conditions. Realistically, what Kevin was alluding to is the space requirements, the setback requirements, the side yards, the rear yards, the front yards. In both of those districts are identical. The space requirements, after you get past a duplex requiring like 8,750 square feet, is each additional unit on a single plane or a one-story dwelling is 3,750 additional feet. In either the R2 district or the R3 district, if this application were in front of you and you were just going strictly on square footage, you could build close to 40 units in the way these definitions fit. Now, you got to back into that the fact that you also have to subtract parking lot space, your setbacks, your side yards, and all those things before you get to the 144 square feet perimeter dimension of the property that you're talking about rezoning here. But as far as the technical things that the city can regulate, you could be doing this as an R2 just as easily as an R3. It's already an R2. If you do it and you change it from a permitted use that it was to a conditional use, and that's a talking point for the council if it was back in front of you as an R2, about what would the conditions be, what would make the neighbors happy in that scenario and so forth. As far as the space requirements, if the developer brings you a footprint and says, we're going to have 18 units, they're going to take up 18 times 3,750 square feet, plus we're going to, add the extra 8,750 in there, and that's going to take up about 70,000 square feet of our 140,000 square feet. They've still got an awful lot of dimension left for the parking lot, the landscaping, the other things that might make this attractive in the neighborhood. So doing it R3, they'd have the same square footage requirements. That's what they've looked at in this, and the conversations about its compatibility with the neighborhood and so forth have been focused more on whether this is something that's going to bring property values down, it's going to create some kind of image hazard to the neighborhood, it's going to expose the neighborhood to more traffic and things like that that we've heard in each of our ordinance readings. But those things as considerations that go past what your ordinance requires you to consider are all, I guess, they're quality of life arguments that you're entitled to hear and consider. As far as things that run afoul of the ordinance, though, as far as measuring and defining and the things that your administrator looks at and so forth, these ordinances are so close. He can consider either an R2 or an R3. So that isn't helping you define anything, I understand, but it's the truth about your ordinance. Your ordinance doesn't have very much line drawing in it. You can go with either one. Now, some of these, logically though, when they land on the planning office desk or they land with your administrator, they're easy. If you got a multi-story, multi-family residence, it's gonna be R3. It's intended to be more compact, multi-story and so forth. Traditionally always is R3 in our community and so forth. So that's just where it's gonna go. This situation where you're transitioning from something that was a permitted use to something that could have been a conditional use in R2, but looked more like it was gonna be the quote apartment, traditional use of apartments in R3, is why it's over in R3. But you still have that as a backup, as far as still looking at R2 again, with some conditions.
I have a question for you.
Yeah.
You were talking about conditional uses, and you had mentioned, you can put a condition for a fence or landscaping or something like that on it. Can that be done with conditions for the developer? If the developer doesn't do something with it, then it would revert back? Is that a possibility?
Well, that's more
or
what I
no?
was referring to as conditional zoning, where you grant the requested zoning as the developer wants it, but then the developer doesn't meet the conditions, and you can revert back to what it was zoned. You can withdraw the approval, and that's pretty much a wait and see what the developer does approach. You can do that.
Now, does that have to be written prior to any approval?
That would become a written ordinance that you do, saying what the conditions of the conditional zoning are.
So in that case, we wouldn't be able to go ahead and approve this evening. We would have to work through conditional
Well, you could
theory of
you could say
what
you're going to
is expected.
Yeah, you could
And-
talk all about the conditions tonight. You can amend any of your prior readings yet through the third reading. If you're satisfied those are the conditions going to make everybody suited to this. Each of your three readings, you have that inherent ability to amend from the prior to make it better.
But if we don't have those conditions spelled out at this point in time, if we just bring them up in theory amongst us and hope that they get written the way that we've tried to express this evening,
Right.
and it isn't done quite that way for whatever reason, the reversion back may not happen.
Yeah. There may be some things that your administrator already has planned to throw out on the table. I don't know what else has gone on in committee since the last meeting on this. There may be some people here from the neighborhood that have some ideas to throw in too. And then it's a question of after you've heard those things, whether you feel you need to sit on this or table it until you have them formulated into a set of conditions, if that's the way you want to proceed, or if it's sufficient that you've heard enough tonight that you think you can just amend and build that into what you adopt. I mean, we can take good notes and amend something tonight if you've got the meat to go with the potatoes, so to speak. So.
John, I have a question too. Did I get you right that you said you can put on conditions on the R2 but not on the R3? Or is that
Well, the R2 comes up to you as a multifamily as a conditional use versus in R3 it's a permitted use. So.
Is that a yes?
Yeah.
Well,
Council
the
can-
way it's
council can
written
make
in
I've got your
2024
ordinances here, but I'm sure that the multifamily residence is the top of the list for conditional uses.
It's a
under
permitted
R2.
use, yeah, in R3, in multifamily.
R3, it's a permitted.
Straight up permitted use.
Straight up. So in other words, we would have to deny the ordinance, in other words, keep it as R2 if we want to put on conditions? That's my question,
No.
or not?
No.
We can
If
put
you-
on
if-
conditions on
If
the
you want to put on
R3.
conditions, then it fits R2 if you want to just go with R2.
I think there's a different point that I would make, and that is that council can make a contract with someone at any point in time, if someone wants to make a contract, and council does as well, for any reason, which I was going to allude to in a minute after I finish kind of saying some facts. I wanted to lay some things out on the table first, but.
Let me try and answer John's question, though.
Thank you.
I think it's, the difference you're asking is the difference between a conditional use and a conditional zoning.
Yeah.
It would be conditional zoning if you approved it in R3 tonight, and the condition may be upon successful full development of the property. And if it doesn't, it could revert back to R2. That may be your.
What I was thinking more of a condition
The conditional
like,
use is something that is allowable in R2, but there again, you would have to describe conditions of the development.
in other words, if we were to propose, and again, my objection to the thing was more the fact that I was uncomfortable seeing a lot of density in that unit. So if I would feel more comfortable voting saying, okay, there's only 14 units in it. So if I put a condition saying, you can build this, but only 14, wouldn't you need to keep it in R2 to put that kind of condition in there, or not?
No, you could still attach your requirements to an R3. It's
No.
not necessary in the R3.
It would be a contracted relationship between a developer and the city, basically. I do have a proposal related to that, as a matter of fact, but
Okay.
I didn't
Go
want to
ahead,
kind of
Kevin.
come out with that. Well, the first thing I was going to point out was the fact that in total, the square footage we're talking about on these lots, or lot at this point, is 144,986.1 feet. So we have a huge lot. Now, the back area of that lot has some creeks in it. It's pretty watery. It's bad soil and not good for development. Obviously, it's not going to be much of an option, but it does, count towards the overall numbers when you look at the zoning rules, the way that they're set up. And as John points out, one very difficult thing about our zoning code is it's not progressively graduated in density scale. In other words, it doesn't say there's one density for an R2, and then an R3 has another density, and an R4 and a 5, and so on. Graduated scales of density. It has one scale of density throughout the R2, the R3, and the R5. Now, in the R2, the only difference and the only controlling factor in general is the fact that in the R2, conditionally only is multifamily a use, only conditionally. Now, it's a funny thing when you look in the zoning code, though. It's I think maybe it was an overlook, or I don't really know why they did it, but in every zone, typically when you graduate in the scales of zones, it's going to say from the R2, it's going to say permitted uses, strictly permitted, will be those in the R1 and these in the R2, right? And the 3, it will say those in the R1 and the 2, and these in the 3. Ours is very strange in the sense that when it says that, it says those in the R, like if you looked at it R2, it will say that it's a permitted use for the uses in the R1, but under conditional uses, it also says the uses in R1. So it's kind of odd, but the graduated scale isn't there, so you end up in the spot where a density gets to a certain point and just kind of stays there when you look at how we look at it. But a lot of these facts have been put out before along this process in the planning meetings and otherwise that this thing could happen in an R2, and of course it could. My point may be different on some level here. We have a deal here that is a repurposing. Tax credits are going to come into impact here. Maybe if I'm the developer, I'm certainly going to put in for tax credits. Muddy water is what you would call putting in for a tax credit when the zone of something isn't correct, academically correct. 15 units is not an R2. An R2 typically, in any typical zoning code, is going to be duplexes and maybe some triplexes, occasionally a quad, occasionally, because it's a huge lot, something weird there, an anomaly. After triplexes, typically it's going to switch to a 3. You're going to see that go up to about 15 or 20 units an acre. Whatever, there's going to be a number there. And then it's going to go to R4, and then it's going to go R5. R5 being a multifamily development where you pull into that and there's many 25 plexes or 30 plexes around you and you're driving. We don't even have R5 really, I don't think, in our city. Maybe 1 or 2 could be classified as that. Another important point, very important point, we're talking new zoning code language, so yes, down the road, I think if it's not 9 months or a year and a half, certainly it's imminent that we look at a new zoning code. I think we all believe that. We'll have to put it as an R3 because it is academically an R3 building. Now, the use that put the building where it's at was granted in any zoning district relatively, right, John? This is a home, what do they call them now? Not an elderly home, but not a nursing home.
care facility.
They all fall under a category of this of group homes. I'm sorry, group homes. It's a group home. So you look at different districts. Group homes are allowed in those districts for another whole reason in state code. But certainly any use future of this thing is an R3 use. So because the amount of units that you could literally fit in the building. Another big point. In this case, the building is the defining factor. The building's not designed to go up in the air. It's a one-story building. It's the defining, those walls are the defining factor of what is going to happen, if anything does, on this site. And when we talk about planning, we're in public and private considerations here, aren't we? And a lot of the times you talk about the invisible hand of the market. That's not metaphysics. What that is that we understand that in markets, rational decisions are made, and those rational decisions are based on numerical value. And so we know no developer's going to come in here and buy these lots, tear that building down, pay for the lots, put 150 grand in it or whatever, tear the buildings down, pay 100 grand to go dump that, and start a project $250,000 in the hole. Repurposing is, we know, the only rational decision for these lots. And the walls are the walls, and you can't go sideways, and you can't go backward, and you can't go up, because they're not engineered for that. So that's what we're talking about when we talk about what market forces could take place here, market possibilities, not metaphysics, but good analysis of rational decision making. And we have to do that in planning a lot, of course. And in this case, we have a trusted local developer, one of us, a local developer, where the honesty isn't a wild shot in the dark here. I think the honesty is known. It's a known quantity, the developer is, many projects and all this stuff. So yes, there's not a lot of upfront certainty, but I think on some level we've been working through what I consider this to be a very successful planning procedure. Yes, it feels burdensome and it feels onerous to handle this, and everybody's, the calls, and we've all been, dealing with what is a planning process, but it's been a good one. And everybody's got to put forth their problems, their issues. We know where people are more than we did. Part of the reason that I think John may have chose to do 3 is not only is it academically straight up, but also it's good to, everyone's going to know in the community what we want to do. We're going to get to hear what they think we ought to do. All these things. It's a very participatory process. I mean, I can't say how amazing it is to see a developer do this who doesn't have to do it, but does it anyway. And in that vein, I guess I've laid out enough facts. Now let's talk politics for a second. We've got a huge housing problem in our city. We all know it. We all talk about it constantly. I faced it myself in so many ways since being here only a year and living in 2 different abodes. So there's that. There's the fact that last year we gave $65,000 of a promissory to a developer on a very decent development project. Now it didn't work out. He couldn't get financing. He left the city, and of course that was a contracted deal that never worked out. Many don't. But there we were on the front line fighting that economic development battle in the right kind of way. Now, for Casey's in our TIF district on 1, $65,000 worth of sewer we gave to that project. The TIF is going to pay for it. It was a textbook perfect deal there. And all the way through many of the conversations we've had about different projects, I've heard us on the front line doing the deeds in the right kind of way. And I'm looking at 4 different housing possibilities right now that include rehab on existing facilities and tax credits. Tax credits are something that will make a project like this, quote, make it work, financially. Because we are talking about a limited amount of units, not a huge multi-story. It's tough to get in there and do a rehab when you know you're not going to get that many units. So in the vein of everything I've said, I know this has been a little bit long. Thank you for Your Honor, for letting me prattle on, but I have a suggestion, an option, a proposal, and that would be that we do a contract with this developer, because all developers, every developer needs to know where we're at. And we can't go out there and say housing's a problem, and we're doing a housing survey, and we're looking at TIFs and all this stuff, and yet the very first time when we're pressed just a little bit by reasonable citizens who have needs here, I think, and I think we all think they're legitimate too, and I think the developer does. And in that vein, I would say the proposal is this: we sign a contract with the developer, but we don't provide him with the wrong district. We give him the R3, because that's what this is. Even if it's 10, it's an R3. Let's do that. Let's be true to what we are doing in economic development, progressively moving forward to solve our problems. But let's make it conditional. Let's say it's conditional that we're signing a contract with this developer for this project of blank amount of units, or no more than blank amount of units. Let's say 17 units, no more than 17 units. And if this developer decides it doesn't get the tax credits, or doesn't decide it's not for them, and decides to option or sell the property, then prior to being sold, the property would revert to R2. And the next developer would have to ply his wares in the same manner that this one has, and therefore the citizens could again take activity with that and give their feedback, which I think we would already know what it was, but we could engage in that process again. And that way everybody is sort of getting an element, we're compromising here, an element of what they want. Limited amount of units, we know what's coming with this developer. If it's not him, it's back to the drawing board, and it's contractual.
I see some of the neighbors smiling, so I think that might satisfy some of them who hear from them.
Is that something that's, as far as it's proposed right now, without a contract being written, is that something that, as our attorney, you would advise us to go ahead and pass this as it is now? Or would you say that it would be better to table this action, get a contract ironed out and signed prior to doing this?
Well, that's a pretty easy question to go with, Darren. I'd probably always go for the latter. My thinking, though, is you might want to hear from the developer as far as whether he has an interest in conditional zoning. If it's a contract zoning and it could be withdrawn, that might answer your question just from hearing from him. The other thought I have is that you have the conditional use criteria that you can come in. You could condition this on 17 apartments that have 850 square feet, 2 bedrooms, and a bunch of things that you want to see in a development that is transitional apartment residences, and you can make that your conditions for conditional use of that space. That's different than the conditional zoning where you grant the R3 and he does his development the way he wants to do it, but if he doesn't do it as you think he agreed, he decides to step on and sell it and you take away the R3 status. That's contract conditional zoning versus conditional use.
Can we do both?
Our conditional use is like a special permit. We don't have a special permit process, so conditional use for us is
Yeah.
like that, basically.
Very much so.
But I mean, my point is a little bit different, and it is that it's a business proposition. You want a zoning from us, we want certain things to be able to allow that. We could pass that tonight contingent upon having a contract at our next meeting that satisfied those things. And that way, he would have at least some, the developer and the property owners would have some solvent thing after tonight. Okay, this is the tangible thing we're gonna get at the next meeting. We'll bring that contract, we'll read it out loud.
Or as I proposed, table it, get the contract,
Well,
then approve at the
let's
next
not
meeting.
make tabling, not tabling
I
the
think
issue.
we should move
Let's have a
forward. I'm
discussion.
not in favor of tabling it
Yeah.
at this time.
But, so, I really appreciate the clarification, because I think we clearly have two options. One is a conditional use in R2 or a conditional zoning permit in R3. So, let's start with getting a response from the developer. John, if you would come up, we do have a public hearing we're going to get to as well, so everyone else can respond to it, but let's get the ideas fully developed before we ask for your responses. And I appreciate the fact that we are trying to negotiate something to move forward. Martha, I agree. So,
John Kuster.
hi, John.
I think my partners and I know we would agree to the conditional zoning, that if we don't move forward with the project, that it would revert back to the present status. I would ask that our present makeup is an LLC. As we go after tax credits, we may need to become a nonprofit. So if that's the case, I would ask that as long as it's Maplewood Apartments, it might be a 501c3 or a LLC, depending on what's the best way to score on the tax credit process.
So, John, and then the other two questions that kind of tag on to that. One would be, are you any closer to determining what you would develop in R3 in terms of number of units? Because we know that's going to come up from our concerned citizens.
Haven't had a contractor or an architect in there yet.
Okay, and then number two.
Since the first time. Yeah.
Number two is the other proposal for conditional use. If council were to come up with an R2 conditional use solution tied to a number, what's your process from there? Going back to talk to your partners?
Yeah. If the use is too low, you might as well just forget it because it's not going to work.
Right.
Financially.
Right.
Nobody's going to put the money into that.
Okay. Okay, so less likely to see a conditional use in R2 permitted, but, okay.
So I have a question.
Sure.
John, if it was 15 units that the neighbors could maybe get on board with, one thought that I had is that if it's 15 versus 18 or 19, you have less cost because you have less bathrooms, less kitchens, less walls to build, et cetera, et cetera. So 15, in fact, even though it's lower number of units, may work because you have less cost in it.
I think, as I mentioned in the previous meetings, when we did have the architect do the preliminary look at the building, he said the maximum we could get was 19. That was the maximum. And some of those are pretty small units. So I hate to be tied to 15, especially if 16 is the number that made the project go. But it might be 15, I don't know, when we get done. And you've got a good point that if you reduce the number of units, there's a reduction in cost because of not putting in bathrooms and kitchens and such. And I would agree to, I would like to see this go forward tonight. It's been tabled. This is my 8th meeting to do this. So I would ask that you turn it down or approve it, one or the other. Thank you.
That's fair. Thanks, John.
Not that I haven't enjoyed the process. I have.
Council, any other comments before I open the public hearing?
I am a little concerned about the idea of restricting units because it could kill the project, and that's my concern with us dictating something that the developer needs to let the market dictate in that way of what the economy of the building, how many renters they can get and such. So I'm leaning towards, just to let you guys know, moving it ahead with the contingency. If it doesn't happen, it goes back to R2, but I have certain reservations about limiting those numbers of units. I feel like we could kill the whole project, which puts all those potential housing people out. So that's my 2 cents.
Yes, thanks. So now I'll open up the public hearing, and I think for this evening, since we have heard a lot of your base concerns, but we have a different proposal on the table tonight. So if you could direct your comments to the proposal that's on the table to possibly help us either clarify or get an indication about what the neighbors would feel about that being approved.
Mind if I put up a visual?
Sure.
All right.
Yeah.
You guys have a way of making me feel a lot dumber once I got in here. So we basically just blew up a map of the area to give everybody a good view of what we're really talking about and to give people a good view of the population density. It is a very dense neighborhood already, as you can see. And where the building is, I wish I could. The building here, all the traffic is going to be coming down Taylor. And so when we're talking about, say, 19 units, and interestingly enough, what came up when I was looking at it is, there are 19 houses right here on South 8th Street. And this property is not included with the property. So I hope that when they did the estimates, that was not included as far as the total size of the property. The actual size of the property is right here. And so, it's just kind of interesting when we're like moving this over, how to cram, if we were to keep the neighborhood consistent with what we have, it's very difficult to cram that many units into that small building. And it's going to be an increased weight. As far as the parking goes, we talked to the owners of this building, and they say they have an easement, so this parking lot is actually not as big as it appears either, because there has to be access to those other people. So basically, if you count up the number of units that are kind of visually represented there, to me, what seems appropriate is more along, and of course I'm going to shoot low here, is more along the order of 12 is what fits and what's consistent with the neighborhood. But, you know, we've talked as a neighborhood, and we've, you know, that 15 number has been mentioned several times, and, you know, that's been one that we've been able to I think, feel fairly reasonable about. So I had some other points, but I got so messed up and confused during all the last discussions, I'm not even going to bring them up anymore, because I feel I feel like my brain just kind of went out the window there.
Welcome to the club.
Yeah. So I guess with the increased parking, you know, still our position is, you know, to not move the project forward. It just does, like Councilman Revelinski said, it feels like it's a big boot in a big foot in a small boot. And so that's our preference, but, you know, we want to, of course, see something happen with the building, and we don't want it just to be left vacant there. So, and I shouldn't say we, because I don't want to speak for everybody else, but I feel like if we could keep the number of units lower, it would definitely be more consistent and more compatible with what the neighborhood, and you won't get a huge, you know, surge of people coming down. That Taylor Street is going to be a very, very busy street, because you're going to see 75% of the traffic go down that street. You know, of course my house is located up at the top, and of course I don't want to see the increased traffic there, but I really feel like Taylor is going to bear the big brunt of that, you know, leading out to South 7th. So that's all I'd like to say.
Thank you. Jason, would you mind turning your display around so that our public can get a look at
Viewers
that
at home.
also? And then,
Here you go.
is there anyone else who would like to comment?
Hari Bedi, 1006 South 8th Street. And so from what I understood from the city attorney is that this project can still go forward under R2, conditional use, and that doesn't have to mean that we have to limit the number of units. So it's not a matter of turning away potential housing in coming into Fairfield. It has nothing to do about the number of units. It could be if we wanted to put that on as a conditional use, but it doesn't have to be. So that's something to consider, that it can still go through even with 19 apartments or whatever he feels comfortable under R2 zoning. So.
And we understand that, Corey. Are you saying as a resident that you would feel more comfortable knowing that it's still R2?
Yes, definitely.
Okay, thank you.
Council, Paul Myers, 1107 South 8th. Boy, I don't even know where to start now. So if R2 is conditional use, right? But what was the difference between number of units between R2 and R3? I was a little confused by that.
There is no difference.
No difference.
There is a density similarity, the exact same density allowance.
Right. So it started out at 24, 25, we got down to 19. We're proposing probably 14, 15, maybe logical use in that building. So if there's really no difference, let's just keep it R2. I mean, you're talking about changing zoning laws, you know, down the road. It's, you know, it's not now, it's not current. We don't know what that's gonna be. Can't base it off that decision. You know, what it could be, what it's going to be. Today is now, it's R2, and there's no difference in use, so why change? He's gonna get his 14, 15, maybe one more in there if he could. If it's not gonna change it. But, you know, there's just a couple different ways to go. If he tears it down, if it goes to R3, then it can go back. You could go under R3 and convert it back under the zoning, conditional zoning. So I don't really see the need to change it. I really do want to thank every one of you, though. You know, we've talked, you know, I've got to know every one of you by name, so that's a nice thing, I guess. I really want to thank Darren. You know, you've really listened to us. All you guys have really listened and gave considerations to our thoughts, views, and ideas. And we really didn't try to offend anybody. And, you know, we really do enjoy this town. So I really just, you know, I just don't see why changing it to R3 really is an advantage or disadvantage. So.
Thank you, Paul.
All right. Let me say up front that, well, there's really two things that we're talking about. One is whether to keep it R2 or R3, and the second is about how many apartments. I agree with Paul. I would prefer to keep it R2. It can be multi-apartments as it is right now. And we don't know, how things are going to be in the future. And at that time, actually, you're going to have to consider the conditions all throughout the city. But the point that's more important to me is that whether it's R2 or R3, that it be conditional use and it be stipulated exactly how many apartments. Because I think that from the very beginning, in my mind, 15, well, I had come to this meeting with the figure of 14 to 15 apartments, and let me tell you why. From the very beginning, it's the density that has been the number one issue for us, because, or number of apartments, because that equals number of people, which is number of cars, which is traffic on the street, which is the multiplication of noise nuisances and so on. When I sat with Jason, if you want to blame anybody, it's Jason and I to get this, some of this started. And we talked about what we felt was ideal for that building that would fit in the neighborhood. It was 10 to 12 apartments. So, I mean, I still think that's ideal, but and I know other people I've talked to last few days are willing to compromise. And I think we should just try to meet right now he's looking at 19. I think you said, John said it's the most he can get. I'm willing to meet him halfway. So 15 I would be okay with, as long as it's stipulated. Then there's no hurt feelings, because it's very clear to all of us. There are a few other points I wanted to make. Let's see. Some of them are mute now after this conversation. And, oh yeah, so just to remind you that right now, south of Adams, we already have at least 3 apartment complexes that are zoned R2. Logan Apartments, Jackson Point Apartments, and the Jackson Apartments between 6th and 7th Street. And then I don't think R3 is appropriate for when you consider the location of this building compared to the other R3s that are south of Adams. So I drove around today just to make sure I was correct. So let me show you where the other R3s are. And the point is that they're all directly off of main thoroughfares. Let me show you. So this is R3, it's right off of Libertyville Road. This is Southgate, it's right off of Main Street. This is Buchanan, and it's with a little jog past commercial buildings. It's right off of Main Street also. And if you notice, this R3 is surrounded by B2 commercial buildings and has fields behind it. Same with Southgate, B2 fields. R3 is kind of its own odd little oddity here. So the only R3s are off of main thoroughfares and surrounded by commercial buildings. The only one that we're talking about that's, right now is it's 7 blocks from Main Street. There's no commercial buildings. It's not similar at all to what we have with R3 right now, south of Adams. And then I want to talk about traffic for a minute, and then I'll conclude. Since I live right across from Nelson Nursing Home, and I work all day long from home, and I really like quiet, otherwise I get disturbed in my work. You have to understand that Nelson Nursing Home had a very different, had what I would call selective traffic. It's very different than a typical apartment traffic. There were 3 shifts at Nelson Nursing Home. There was 6 a.m., 2 p.m., 10 p.m. The 6 a.m. and the 10 p.m., for the most part, were not disturbing at all. I'm not working during that time, nor is anyone else. It was only the 2 p.m. that you even notice. And the thing is that each shift was, I would say at least 10 cars, I don't remember how many, would exit and then come, and it would all be within about a 10 to 15 minute time period. And that was pretty much the only traffic you got. There weren't very many visitors, people coming to visit, their parents or whatever at Nelson Nursing Home during the week. There were a lot of visitors on the weekend. And there was usually 1 service truck per day, sometimes a second service truck. So it was it was actually pretty quiet, and it was very orderly. You didn't have radios playing in the parking lot. You didn't have people talking. And all of this you will have with, families with kids. And that's why the number of apartments is so important, to keep the potential for those nuisances down. And in fact, in 1974, the appraiser that was supporting the neighbors that did not want this building submitted an appraisal of this situation, and he said, this was McIntyre Real Estate, John McIntyre. He said, as far as traffic pattern, he said the streets in this area are narrow and not suitable for heavy vehicular traffic. All right, so in conclusion, I just hope that we come to, by this evening, that we come to a clear conclusion, that we, if we're going to do, or that we have specific stipulations about how many apartments, and you'll have a discussion about whether it should be R2 or R3. But it would be a shame for us, it would be a shame for the city council to simply vote for R3 without any stipulation going forward and have, in a sense, one party win and the other party lose. First of all, you have very angry neighbors, but more than that is I think we have a real chance to come to a compromise that we all can live with. Okay, then just to support this, how to look at zoning, in 1974, John Morrissey represented the appellants, attorneys for appellants.
Jennifer?
Yeah.
I don't know if you're helping your cause right now. I think your points
No,
have been
this is
made.
not. No, this is a general statement. It's not. I mean, I think
Okay.
it's. I mean,
You've gone on a little long.
Fine.
And you've covered points that you've made in past meetings.
Okay, fine.
And
So-
I think right now, clearly the council and the others understand that there are 2 options on the table, and we want to get to the point where we discuss them and vote on them.
Okay, fine.
Okay?
Great.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I'll be really fast.
Sure. No. You're welcome to you're welcome to come up.
I'm Becky Myers. I just had a few things that I thought of while we were sitting here. I think we came tonight, the neighborhood with a sense of compromise. You perhaps haven't had
No question
seen a
about
lot
it.
of
We
from us,
see that. We appreciate that.
So we really would like harmony for everyone. And who I haven't heard mentioned tonight is the people who are going to live there. And to me, I understand the financial part, but I also understand that the quality of life of the people who are going to live there will be better with the smaller, with bigger apartments. I mean, it just will. It's more space for them, for their children. So think about them too. I mean, we're all coming here with compromises, and I think John has made it clear he wanted this to be a benefit for his employees, and he should be willing to consider them too, as you should.
Thank you. Anything else? Follow up? Go ahead, Paul.
John, we've talked quite a bit lately too, as long as everybody else. But would you talk, maybe your investors would consider the R2 and 1415 if that would work? And I was wondering if you would really consider that, like we've talked about.
Well, I think that's the same question I asked him. And
I
I think
think
he
one of
really
the-
needs to, if that were the direction the council went,
Right.
he would need to review that with his investors.
Can I address that question, Your Honor?
Yeah.
38.4 is how many apartments can be done on this piece of property according to the footage we're talking. 38.4. So for a developer that has the power to do literally 38.4 units on a piece of property, who comes to the BOA for a conditional R2 permit for this multifamily, and they're looking at the project and all these other ins and outs, getting a guaranteed 17 tonight is a good deal, because you can get 24 if you go to the BOA, because you could get 38.4. And he's, coming down to it. They're going to look at the building and the maximum size of the building and allowance, because this project is defined by the size of the building. But if he doesn't have the R3 designation and he goes for tax credits, if I'm the guy working at IFA and I'm just like him, he's kicking it. Not going to get a tax credit for that. Why? Because it's muddy. This isn't, my goodness, you've got 15, 12 units here. This is not an R2, this is an R3. Why aren't you an R3? The minute you start going into an explanation with that guy about zoning, different codes, and say, well, you're out. That's an easy way to kick a guy out so I can do the 2 other projects in Des Moines that I really wanted to do anyway, right? So that's a bad deal. That's muddy water. It could be for a finance institution as well. If he doesn't get that R3, if I'm him and I'm coming back to R2 for the conditional, I'm upping the number of units if I want to do the project. Why? Because I want the project to work. If I don't have tax credit money, I got to produce more money. So I need more units so I can produce more money to make the thing a viable project. One way or the other, the better definition of what is this project going to be for the folks living in and around that area is an R3 with a contract with signatures on it and commitments. That's why I came up with it, because it gives the security you guys want, because that's what you really want. I know what I'm getting, and it's something that I can deal with. And I think for him to come in at a project where he could maybe do 20 small units, Lord knows, and to say I'll do 17 or 16, no more than 17 units, and the likelihood in our conversations, he and I talk, the likelihood is that he probably won't get 17 because he won't be able to make it work physically. But to give him a max of 17 is a guarantee that is a compromise, because he's going to go with more units if he doesn't get those tax credits. R2 guarantees he won't.
Okay. Any others that would like to address the public hearing? Okay. If not, we'll close the public hearing, and council.
I've got a comment.
Heard your options. Go ahead, Tony.
I'm glad to see the community and the neighbors come in here tonight with some compromise. I think it's good on their part. I think we should compromise a little bit ourselves also. I support R3 still, because I think it works for what Kevin states. But I also support conditions on the project and also number of apartments. I'm not sure the correct number yet. I think it's between 15 and 17. That's what I need to talk about some more and get more straight in my head of what would work for everyone, the neighborhood, the developer, and the city.
Go ahead, John.
I'm pretty much with Tony. I think Kevin made a good argument for the R3. I think, to deny it, they're so close. Anyway, the thing would happen either way, and especially would revert back to R2 if it didn't happen. I don't think from the neighborhood side it's a big loss. And also from the, if it would help ultimately for other kind of financing or whatever Kevin was saying, clarify the waters for any kind of, help that the developers can get, I think that's a plus. But I am uncomfortable on voting for it without stipulating that condition, since that's kind of the issue. I'm kind of with Darren to say, well, we'll just say R3 and then we'll figure it out in the letter, in the next council meeting. I'm uncomfortable with that. So I think Tony, again, said, yeah, it's somewhere between 15 and 17. Well, okay, how about 16?
My question to the community is, can the community handle 17 better than the community can handle 20? Because that number's gonna go up to 20 if there's no other financing source in here. That's the only way it's gonna work. In other words, the project will be dead in the water. It'll be a higher number of units.
I like 17.
17's better than 19.
Because I don't think they're gonna get it, first of
Right.
all.
Yeah,
But
tough.
it also gives that flexibility that the project will actually be viable, which is why we're doing this. I think we're trying to make this happen. Anyway, we can go back and forth. a few
Yeah, I mean, it's
times.
one unit, whatever. I probably won't vote no. I probably won't vote no for 17 neighbors, I'm sorry.
I just
But-
see the need to move forward with R3.
Okay. So then I'd entertain a motion now. Kevin, you have what essentially, you've sort of defined what the proposal would be. Why don't you reiterate that with a number and see if one of your council members would make that motion?
The motion would be that we conditionally rezone the property R3 for this project. If this project did not go forward, the project would revert back to, or the property would revert back to an R2, and for no more than 17 units.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Hallie, second by Ledger Kalen. Discussion. Please call roll.
Hallie?
Yes.
Ledger Kalen?
Yes.
Rasmussen?
Yes.
Hammes?
Yes.
Boyer?
Abstain.
Hamilton?
No.
Berlinski?
Yes.
Okay, motion passes 5-1. So that will then be, that'll be created as an agreement before anything proceeds. And again, I think tonight's public hearing was very good in terms of the spirit of cooperation. I know that there's some disappointment about the actual zoning decision, but hopefully this will lead to a project that the neighborhood would be able to live with in terms of what is being developed. You know, it's been stated a number of times, there is a value to knowing who our developer is, and having sat through this and the feedback that I know that some of his partners have given a number of the council members and to our city, is they've learned that there is a great sensitivity to the neighbors, and I expect that they will honor that and build a good project. So thank you all for participating.
Mayor, I didn't explain why I abstained. I assume that you might know from the last time, but I have business and personal associates on both sides, so that's why I'm abstaining. But I sincerely appreciate everybody's effort in the conversations.
Great, thank you. Next, council will move on to a resolution to set a public hearing for wastewater fee rate increases. That would be at our next meeting, September 9th at 7 p.m. I know that the committee has been working very diligently to flesh this out. We've gotten a view of where we need to go with this, and that will be presented to the council at the public hearing on September 9th. So I'll entertain a motion to set September 9th for a public hearing.
Move to set public hearing.
Moved by Hamilton.
Second.
Second by Ledger Kalen. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, the same sign. Thank you.
Mayor?
Yes.
Before we move on, may I beg your indulgence long enough for me to go and get a few visual aids?
Sure. So we'll.
Did you do that, Kevin?
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so council, our next item then is the first reading of an ordinance regarding our water fee rate, which would involve an increase. You all have copies of what is proposed. I'll ask our committee chair, Darren Hamilton, to explain what it is we're considering, how we arrived at that.
Over a very protracted time period, the city has had problems with effluent from our sanitary sewer overflowing into our streams and public areas, private areas here in the community. We feel as a committee that the time has come now that we can no longer just do Band-Aid patches to what we have in our system, the problems that our system has. And it is our belief that we should move forward with a 7-step program of improving our plant and our transmission infrastructure in order to reduce the sanitary sewer overflows that the city has. And the first step that has been proposed through city engineers, French Reinicker, and also a consulting engineering firm, McClure, that we brought in to examine the entire big picture of how we should tackle this problem, has been recommended to us that we need to do a STEP program, sanitary sewer transmission overflow elimination program. We left the O out from overflow, but it equates to STEP. And that first step comes in the form of increasing the rates for sanitary sewer so that we can afford to be able to borrow the sums of money that we need in order to do the improvements that are absolutely necessary in order to fulfill requirements from the administrative order that was placed on us by the Iowa Attorney General, also from the Iowa DNR, and restrictions also placed on us by the EPA of the federal government. As you can see from the maps here that I've put up in front of the council, the sanitary sewer plant needs to be expanded in area in order to create a new equalization basin up in the northwestern quadrant. We also have, I believe it's 11 different major improvements that need to be done at the plant. The entire estimate currently is approximately $17 million to do this work. And if you look on the map to your left, you'll see different transmission areas, piping that comes down to our plant. The orange area in the lower right-hand corner is the first step of transmission that we're going to work on, which comes from approximately Lamson Woods down underneath the bypass to the northern part of our plant, where you see the little circle with the number 1 in it. In order to do this, we're proposing a 20% increase in sanitary sewer rates. It would take from where we currently are at $14.85 for minimum service fee to $17.82 per month. And it would also increase the per cubic foot use from our current rate of 0.049, I believe it is, to 0.059. It's represented here as 0.0588, but as in the past, I've proposed to round those numbers to a 3-decimal system, making it a little easier for them to calculate in the front office up here. It's also easier to see it on your bill in terms of that. So I would propose that we approve this ordinance change in our rates with the minor change of instead of reading 0.0588 cents per cubic foot to 0.059 cents per cubic foot.
Okay. Thank you, Darren. So we'll consider that a motion to approve the first reading as amended.
Second.
Second by Ledger Kalen. Discussion.
I have a question. Can you tell us about the surcharge? We do a surcharge now for users. hear the
Yes, we do.
extra strength users?
We currently do a extra strength user surcharge, and those rates are, I have my numbers here in front of me. Those rates currently are the .062, or excuse me, 0.18 for over 200 milligrams per liter BOD, 0.20 over 250 milligrams per liter of suspended solids, and 0.6 over 30 milligrams per liter of ammonium nitrogen. And we also require our industrial users to do some pre-treatment at their facilities before that gets into our system. And it's also monitored by our plant superintendent, Sean Worley. Those increases are similar to everyone else's. They are 20%. This is a 20% across the board increase in all rate structures that we have for sanitary sewer.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? If not, please call the roll.
And this is the first year?
This is first reading? Yes.
First
Approval from the
as
first to the
amended.
second.
As amended, right.
Yep.
Okay. Hamilton,
Yes.
Ledger Kalin,
Yes.
Revelinsky,
Yes.
Howley,
Yes.
Boyer,
Reluctant, yes.
Rasmussen,
Yes.
Hamas.
Yes.
Okay, motion passes 6.5 to 0. Next, we'll move on to an amendment. Let's see, and this is by ordinance, and this would be to...
Yes, Your Honor,
Go ahead.
basically clean up language to an older ordinance that we've had in place for quite
in terms
some
of
time.
distance. for
Distance
public-
requirements for connection to sanitary sewer.
Correct.
And it falls more in line with what our restrictions are on water service as well. It takes some ambiguity out of the two, where one was actually farther in distance than the other one was. It equalizes things out so that we don't hold somebody to a longer distance restriction for water versus sewer. And that's about it in a nutshell, really.
Yep.
It goes from 100 to
From
300
100 to
feet.
300
It changes
feet.
from 100 to 300 feet.
I had to
That's
read it 3
what
times to
you're-
find out the
The
difference.
difference,
between-
yeah.
Basically, the distance
Right,
of a
right.
block. Where's Walden?
Right, and you're right,
Same
Kevin.
way.
It's approximately the distance of one city block is what we're talking about. And I would move to approve this ordinance from the first to the second reading.
Okay, moved by Hamilton,
Second.
second by Hamas. Any discussion? Now, please call the roll.
Hamilton,
Yes.
Hamas,
Yes.
Boyer,
Yes.
Howley,
Yes.
Rasmussen,
Yes.
Ledger Kalin,
Yes.
Revelinsky.
Yes.
Thank you. Council, I just wanted to bring to your attention that last week, Kevin and I had a meeting here at City Hall with property owners to discuss the facade restoration grant that we're going to pursue again this year, an application we weren't able to get in at the end of the year last year due to some of the design work taking a lot longer than we had anticipated. There has been designs that have been prepared for, how many buildings, Kevin, in total?
I think we had
Approximately?
about 15 designs that were done
Okay,
already.
about 15 designs. Again, there were evaluations of all of the properties in the downtown. This grant that we're going to be applying for, which is a CDBG grant, will ask for some selectivity in terms of the buildings that are eventually chosen based on visual impact. We had a pretty good representation of property owners that were here at this meeting. We're going to hold another one probably within the next 2 weeks to see if we can get some of the others here, or one-to-one meetings. But this is all part of the process of getting our application in place, because they essentially have to agree to formally go into the application. They will need a letter from their bank if there's money that's going to be borrowed to indicate that the bank would be willing to lend towards this program. Good news there is that the chamber, who has organized with four of the local banks a downtown renewal fund, those funds would be available for this project. So we feel that any of the property owners in the downtown will have access to low-interest loans from the local banks. That is ongoing, and hopefully over the next month or two, we're going to have the application buttoned up and in, hopefully, for approval. Also, I received a call from Dick DeAngelis, who is the chair of the Fairfield Media Center Committee, and he has requested council liaison for his committee. This would be a non-voting member, someone who would be able to bring back information about what it is that they're doing as they're becoming more of an integral part of what we are putting out as a community, and they want to be more actively involved in what they can do for promoting some of the programs that government is involved in. They had invited Councilman Halley to be their liaison, a media representative, so if he's willing to do it, willing to suggest that he do that.
Yep.
So we'll
Mr.
make a
Dees is
motion
really good.
motion to approve Councilman Halley to join as a non-voting member of the Fairfield Media Center.
So moved.
Okay, moved by Hess, second by Boyer. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign.
Feel railroaded.
Meeting approved. A councilman approved. That's all I had for my report. I know we have some committee reports that are listed. We didn't have any minutes from them. Is there anything that anyone would like to report?
I will
from
do
the-
a brief
Yes.
one, but I ran from meeting to meeting, so I didn't bring my minutes with me either. We had a property committee last week. We discussed 3 items. 2 of them were closing alleys or vacating alleys. One was between Grimes and Depot, the first north-south alley west of 6th Street. Paint line requested that be closed, the first half of the alley, and the dead-end alley that goes back to the west. The committee approved that contingent to Dave Reef of Reef Grain and Feed having an easement out of there and no utilities in the alley. Have we got anything back on that yet?
It's good news on the utilities. Doesn't appear to be anything significant in there. I think there was one line, gas line, but it's been cut off by the business, so we'll probably have that cut off actually at the right-of-way line. So no issues with utilities there.
Anything from Dave Reef and paint line on it?
I haven't heard anything there yet, and I didn't get a chance to talk to them or last week. I was going to say this week, but this week has just started. But last week, so I hope to get with them this week. But we do know we have no physical impairments, as we don't on the other one either. And we do have to get an easement on it as well, though. Easement for use from one of the property owners. So both of them do entail a little easement of use deal for property owners who are there, as Tony's saying, that are adjacent and may need to use it.
So no action on that one at this meeting. Other alley was just north of the Methodist Church between Court and B Street.
Yep, and on the east side of the alley, that is the private property owner, because the parsonage is right there on the front
Correct.
corner of the alley. And they are not talking about removing it from public traffic either, really. They just want to pave it, and they want to own it before they pave it. And they have been maintaining it for some time.
Any utilities?
No, no utility issues there, except for connections, I think, to the parsonage, or I'm sorry, the church, coming across to the church. But it's theirs. They know it. They are aware that if they pave it, they would have to key that out and do their repairs and replace. So I think we're good on both of them. We'll be moving, hopefully bringing them forward a couple weeks from now with both vacating and selling resolutions, because they will have to pay us, and John and I have to discuss this actually too, but they'll have to pay us the price of doing like abstract, if it's to the pleasure of council, abstracting and all the other work. Exactly, yeah, we vacate them by ordinances, and then they pay us the price of the abstracting and everything it took to get it to the point of being able to sell it to them. John, if you want to comment on it right now, as far as selling these, because we're selling, the way I have done it in the past is we give the other property owner on the other side of alleys a chance. Do you want to own that half, the linear half of the alley? Well, in this case, in the church, it's just at the very end, that one. And of course, if they have a right to use, that's what they're concerned with, and they wouldn't have any responsibilities for maintenance, because the church had said they would be glad to do that and have been doing it. So if that's the pleasure of council, that's how we would proceed with the rest of these. John, I don't know if you want to.
I don't see anything wrong with proceeding. Parsonage is all the church.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay, well, we'll have the discussion, I think, when we can bring it up for ordinance. We'll have 3
Yeah.
readings on that, so. Anything else, Tony?
That's all.
Thank you. Ways and Means?
We had a joint meeting with Water and Sewer, and I was not in the mood for spending a lot of money.
So it was a great discussion.
That was the end of the Ways and Means portion of it. The water and sewer, I laid in front of you a printout of our rate study and recommendations for the water portion of our system. Unfortunately, Carl had an accident and was unable to be at the meeting with us, and I think that the committee felt that we need to have a little more discussion with Carl included, and I'm glad to see he's in the audience tonight, and I hope he's feeling much better and not as banged up as what I had heard you were the night of our meeting. So I wanted to put this out for your information so you could peruse it at your leisure.
Thank you, Darren. Hey, in the city administrator, Kevin, I know you copied the council on a letter of appreciation and letter of support. Any comments you wanted to make on that? Or?
I was going to ask if anybody, any of the department heads had any report they wanted to make before I. And other than that, we did have a letter of appreciation. Derek, you want to?
Well, I think everyone's read it. We'll just make a reference of it. No, that's fine.
I feel bad.
You essentially the Fairfield Municipal Band finished another successful season, and they were offering their thanks to Park and Rec for all of their cooperation in putting that on each year, and this being a very special year with the naming of the bandstand for Ron Prill, which the Park and Rec did play a part in that as well, so we appreciate that. Okay. If there is any other business for the council, entertain a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Moved by Hamilton.
Second.
Second by Boyer. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, the same sign. Meeting adjourned.